kept the envelope in my glove compartment for 11 days before I opened it. Not because I forgot about it. I knew exactly what it was. I'd watched my grandmother press it into my hands at my college graduation party, right before my uncle leaned over and said, loud enough for half the backyard to hear, "Honestly, Mom, why are you giving her that old thing? It's probably just sentimental junk." And my grandmother had looked at him the way she always looked at him when he said something that embarrassed her. Not angry, just tired. And she'd squeezed my fingers around the envelope and said, "Keep it safe, sweetheart. And don't open it here." She passed away 6 weeks later. A stroke. Fast, they said. She didn't suffer. I didn't open the envelope at the hospital. I didn't open it at the funeral. I kept it in the glove compartment of my Honda Civic, and every time I got in or out of the car, I thought about it sitting there, and I just didn't. My name is Serena. I was 26 years old. I had $1,400 in my checking account, a nursing job I'd just started at a hospital in Raleigh, and a grandmother who had, for my entire life, been the only person in my family who made me feel like I was worth something. Her name was Loretta. She called me her bright one. She said it like it was a fact, not a compliment. My uncle's name is Dennis. He is my mother's older brother, and he has, for as long as I can remember, been the gravitational center of our family, the one everyone orbited, the one whose opinion closed conversations, the one who sat at the head of the table even when it wasn't his house. He's a commercial real estate developer in Charlotte. He drives a black Mercedes, and he says things like, "At the end of the day," and frankly, speaking as someone with experience, and everyone nods. My mother nods. My aunt nods. My aunt nods. Even my grandfather used to nod, back when he was alive. I had never, not once in my life, seen Dennis be kind to anyone who couldn't do something for him. The graduation party was at my uncle's house. His idea, he'd insisted. Backyard. Catered. Maybe 60 people. It was a nice gesture, objectively. But Dennis had spent most of the afternoon steering conversations toward his new development project in Mooresville and making jokes about how I'd finally finished my degree, as if 4 years of nursing school while working part-time was a thing that happened to you rather than a thing you built. Day by day, shift by shift, on about 5 hours of sleep. When my grandmother gave me the envelope, he'd made the comment about sentimental junk and then moved on immediately, back to talking to one of his business contacts. Like the moment hadn't happened. My grandmother watched him go and then looked at me and said, "He doesn't know." I didn't know what she meant. I thought she meant he didn't know how to appreciate things that weren't worth money. I thanked her and tucked the envelope into my purse, and later, driving home, I put it in the glove compartment. 11 days passed. I was coming off a 12-hour night shift the morning I finally opened it. I was sitting in the hospital parking garage, too tired to drive yet, eating a granola bar. I looked at the glove compartment. I thought, she's gone now. There's no one to explain it if I don't understand it. I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten in my grandmother's loopy cursive, and a small laminated card, the kind banks used to give out. Old. The plastic was yellowing at the corners. The handwritten note said, "Serena, I've been waiting for the right time to give you this. I suppose a graduation is right enough. This account was set up for you in 1987, the year you were born. I put money in every year since. It is a pod account, which means it passes directly to you. No will, no probate, no one else's permission. The account number is on the card. Go to First Heritage Bank on Glenwood Avenue. Ask for someone in the trust department. Take your ID. I love you. Grandma Loretta." I read it twice. Then I flipped over the laminated card. It had a routing number, an account number, and a branch code. The card said First Heritage Savings Bank at the top. Below that, in my grandmother's handwriting, "Serena Marie Calloway, beneficiary." I sat in that parking garage for a long time. Pod account. Payable on death. I knew what that meant. I'd taken a personal finance elective in my second year, and the professor had mentioned it once in passing. The account bypasses the estate entirely, goes straight to whoever is named, like a beneficiary designation on a life insurance policy. My grandmother had put money in every year since 1987. That was 37 years. I drove home, I showered, I slept for 4 hours. Then I put on real clothes, not scrubs, and I drove to Glenwood Avenue. First Heritage Bank was not a big, flashy building. It was a medium-sized brick building with a navy blue awning and a parking lot that was maybe half full on a Tuesday afternoon. I pushed through the glass door, and a teller at the nearest window looked up and smiled at me. I walked up to the counter and I said, "I need to speak with someone in the trust department. I'm the beneficiary on a pulled account, and I believe the account holder passed away recently." The teller, she was maybe 22, with her hair pulled back neatly, wrote something on a notepad, asked for my ID, and picked up the phone. A few minutes later, a man came out from an office in the back. He introduced himself as the branch manager. He asked me to come with him. We sat across from each other at a desk with a nameplate that said James Whitfield, branch manager. He was maybe 55, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of calm that comes from having these conversations regularly. He took the laminated card, looked at it, typed something into his computer. He went very still, not alarmed, more like careful. The way someone gets careful when something unexpected comes up on a screen and they need a moment to process before they speak. He looked up at me and said, "Miss Calloway, I need to verify a few things. This will take just a moment." He made a phone call. He spoke quietly. He typed again. He asked me for my social security number and my grandmother's full name and date of birth, which I knew because I'd looked up her obituary that morning, specifically because I thought I might need it. He hung up the phone. He folded his hands on the desk and he looked at me with the expression of someone about to say something that is going to land differently than they can predict. "Miss Calloway," he said, "your grandmother opened this account in 1987 as a POD savings account with you named as sole beneficiary. She made regular contributions, annually, sometimes more frequently, and the account has accrued interest for nearly 4 decades. I want to confirm, are you aware of the current balance?" I said no. He turned his monitor toward me. I looked at the number on the screen. I don't know what my face did. I know I didn't say anything for a while. I know I looked at the number, and then I looked at the wall behind his head, and then I looked back at the number, because I needed to make sure I wasn't misreading the commas. $942,000, not $12 million, but nearly $1 million. 37 years of deposits and compound interest in a high-yield savings account that my grandmother had chosen carefully and never touched. Just added to. Every year, like she was setting a place at a table she expected me to eventually sit at. "The account is yours," Mr. Whitfield said. "There's no estate involvement required. Because of the pod designation, it transferred to you at the time of her passing. We do need to complete some paperwork and verify the death certificate, which you can bring in or we can request. But the account is yours, Ms. Calloway." I asked him one question. I said, "Was anyone else listed on this account, ever?" He checked. "No," he said, "just you." I drove home and sat on my couch and stared at the wall. I made a mistake. I know exactly when I made it and why, and I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about whether I would change it, and the honest answer is probably not, because it led to what happened later, and what happened later needed to happen. The mistake was telling my mother. I called her that evening. We were close, or I thought we were close. She's warm, my mother. She has a soft voice, and she remembers everyone's birthdays, and she always asks how you're doing and means it. But she has never, not once in my adult life, kept a secret from Dennis. I think she learned a long time ago that keeping things from him cost more than it was worth, and she'd quietly stopped trying. I told her about the account. I told her it was a pod account. I told her it was a pod account. I told her Grandma Loretta had set it up for me specifically. I didn't tell her the exact balance. I said a significant amount. I thought that was enough of a hedge. It was not enough of a hedge. Dennis called me 48 hours later. He called from his personal cell phone at 7 in the morning on a Thursday, which meant he wanted to catch me off guard. I was still in bed. I answered because I didn't look at the name before I picked up. He said, "Serena. I heard about this account situation. We need to talk." His voice had the tone he used when he was being reasonable. It was the most dangerous tone he had. He said that the family had been under a lot of stress since Grandma passed. He said that there had been some misunderstandings about her estate. He said, and this is the part I'll never forget, he said, "I think Mom would have wanted her assets distributed in a way that considers the whole family's well-being. Don't you think?" I said. "The account was set up with me as the sole beneficiary. That was her decision, Dennis." He said, "I know. I know. I'm not disputing that. I just think before you make any moves, we should get together and talk it through. As a family." I said I'd think about it. He said there's also the question of some of her other paperwork. "I've been going through her things. I found some documents you might want to know about." I asked what documents. He said he'd rather discuss it in person. I said, "What documents, Dennis?" He paused. "Then, her will names the beach house in Wilmington as part of the general estate. Depending on how things are structured, there could be competing claims. I just think it would be better if we sat down together with my attorney." I knew what that meant. He wanted me in a room with his lawyer. I said, "I'll think about it," and I hung up. I called my own lawyer that afternoon. I did not have a personal attorney. I called a law firm I found through my hospital's employee assistance program, explained the situation, and paid for a 1-hour consultation. The attorney I spoke to was a woman named Rachel Hendricks. She was businesslike and clear, and she told me 3 things. 1. A pod account is not part of an estate. It cannot be contested through probate. The designation overrides the will in nearly all circumstances. 2. If Dennis had obtained any documents related to my grandmother's estate and was suggesting they created competing claims, she would need to see them to know what he was actually talking about. 3. I should not meet with his attorney without representation. Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because I was 26, I was newly employed, and I had just inherited nearly $1 million from a woman who had chosen deliberately and legally to leave it only to me. "Your uncle," she said, "sounds like someone who is very used to being the smartest person in the room." I said that was accurate. She said, "That's actually useful to us." Dennis owned a beach house in Wilmington that had been in the family for 30 years. He'd managed the property for years, and somewhere along the way, he had apparently started treating the management as ownership. My grandmother had mentioned it to me once, years before she died. She'd said, "Dennis handles things, but the house belongs to all of us." What I didn't know, until Rachel started pulling on threads, was that Dennis had quietly had my grandmother sign a document 3 years earlier, something that appeared to be a property management agreement but contained language that could be interpreted as transferring a controlling interest in the property to him. My grandmother had been 78. The document had been prepared by Dennis's attorney and signed in his presence without my grandmother having independent counsel. Rachel said that word for word to me over the phone and waited for me to hear what she was saying. I heard it. He hadn't done this to steal from me specifically. He'd been doing it for years, quietly reshaping what was the family's into what was his, one signed document at a time. The pod account had caught him off guard because it existed completely outside his reach. My grandmother had set it up that way. I was now quite certain, on purpose. She knew, I told Rachel. "Probably," Rachel said. I asked what we could do. She said, "Quite a bit, actually." Here is what happened next, and I want to be clear. None of it was reckless. None of it was revenge for its own sake. Every step had a legal basis and was taken on advice of counsel. I say that not to absolve myself, but because it matters. Because the people who do things like what Dennis did count on the people they've taken from being too overwhelmed or too unrepresented or too afraid to respond with actual teeth. I was not afraid. I was 26 and I had a lawyer and I had a grandmother who had quietly built me a foundation for 37 years, precisely so I would have the ability to stand. Rachel filed a challenge to the property management agreement. The grounds were undue influence and lack of independent counsel, standard elder law arguments that are taken seriously in North Carolina when the facts support them. The facts supported them. We also filed a complaint with the North Carolina State Bar regarding the attorney who had prepared the document. Not as a primary strategy, as a factual report. Rachel said we were obligated to report what we'd found and that it would likely be investigated. Dennis found out about both filings within a week. I know because he called my mother, not me, and my mother called me in tears asking what I was doing. I said, "Mom, he had a lawyer draw up papers that took advantage of Grandma. I'm not willing to let that go." She said, "Can't we just, can we just keep this in the family?" And I loved my mother. I really did. But I said, "Dennis is the one who took it out of the family. I'm just responding to where he took it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Grandma always said you were her bright one." And that was the first time either of us cried. The hearing for the property challenge was scheduled for late October. I will not walk through every legal detail because that is not the point of what I'm telling you. The point is what happened at Dennis's annual fall dinner party, 3 weeks before the hearing. Dennis threw a dinner party every October. It had become a tradition. 30, sometimes 40 people, his house in Charlotte catered. His way of reminding everyone in his professional and personal orbit that he was doing well. He'd been doing it for 15 years. He invited me? I think he expected me to decline or to show up meekly and not make eye contact. He did not expect me to RSVP yes and arrive with Rachel. I want to say Rachel had not planned to attend as my attorney. She came as my guest. She is also, it happens, a genuinely warm person who is very good at making conversation, and she spent the first 45 minutes of that party talking to people I had never met, and at least 2 of them were clients of Dennis's who did not know there was ongoing litigation involving property documents and elder law. Dennis found me in the kitchen around 8 o'clock. He maneuvered me into the corner near the refrigerator, which I'm sure he meant to feel intimidating, and he said, "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're embarrassing yourself." I said, "I don't feel embarrassed." He said, "Drop this. Whatever your lawyer told you, it's not worth the family damage. Take your account money and move on." I said, "The Attorney General's Elder Care Division received a copy of our filing last week. That wasn't something we chose to do optionally. It's required when there's evidence of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. I just wanted you to know that directly, since we're family." He stared at me. I had not gone looking for this fight, but I had stopped flinching. He said, "You don't know what you're doing." I said, "I know exactly what I'm doing." Grandma did too. I walked back into the dining room and stood next to Rachel and had a glass of water and thought about my grandmother pressing an envelope into my hands in a backyard in Charlotte and saying, "He doesn't know." She wasn't talking about sentimental value. She was talking about the account, about the documents she'd quietly kept copies of, about the letters she'd had notarized in 2019 and left with her personal attorney. A letter that described, in her own words, how she felt about the management agreement she'd signed and who had been present and what had been said. My grandmother had been planning this for a long time. She just needed me to open the envelope. The property challenge was settled 4 months later in February. I won't give you the exact terms because they're subject to a confidentiality agreement, but I will tell you that the beach house is no longer solely managed by Dennis, and that the settlement included provisions that Rachel described as meaningful. The bar complaint is still under review. My mother and I are okay. It took time. She called me in December and said she'd been doing some thinking and she talked to her own therapist and she wanted to say she was sorry she hadn't seen what Dennis had been doing sooner. I told her she'd been living inside it for a long time, that it's harder to see from the inside. My uncle and I have not spoken since the October dinner party. I don't expect we will. I have not spent very much of the money. Some of it went to Rachel's fees, which were substantial but worth every dollar. I paid off my car. I put the rest in a high-yield account, fitting, I suppose, and I'm thinking about eventually using part of it for a down payment on a house, something that is mine, something no one can maneuver out from under me on a document I didn't read carefully enough. I still have the laminated card from the envelope. It's in my wallet. It's yellowed and the plastic is cracked along one edge, and it has my name in my grandmother's handwriting. Serena Marie Calloway, beneficiary. She'd been carrying me forward for 37 years before I even knew it. I was 26 years old, eating a granola bar in a parking garage, too tired to think straight, and I almost didn't open it. I'm so glad I did. What is something someone in your family believed in you enough to do that you only understood later? Tell me below. I read every single one. I think about Dennis sometimes, not with anger anymore, more with a kind of clarity I didn't used to have. He spent years being the person everyone deferred to, the one who managed things, who shaped what the family meant by sheer force of confidence. And it worked. It worked for a long time, not because he was right, but because no one who knew better had the standing to say so out loud. That's the thing about people who operate the way Dennis did. They don't need to be feared. They just need everyone around them to believe that pushing back costs more than it's worth. My mother believed that. My aunt believed it. Even my grandfather, in his later years, had seemed to quietly decide that keeping the peace with Dennis was easier than the alternative. And so Dennis kept going. Each document, each conversation steered a certain way, each moment where someone chose not to look too closely. It added up. Not through dramatic villainy, just through the slow accumulation of unchallenged decisions. What stopped it wasn't luck. It was my grandmother making a choice 37 years before the problem came to a head. She saw clearly who Dennis was long before I did. She couldn't stop him directly. She was one person in a family system that had already organized itself around his comfort. But she could do something. She could build something outside his reach, quietly, over decades, and make sure it landed in the hands of the person she trusted most to use it well. That is a specific kind of intelligence, not clever tricks, not confrontation, just the patient, deliberate act of building forward when you can't fix the present. I think about that a lot when I think about what it means to actually take care of someone you love. My grandmother didn't write me letters about believing in me. She didn't give speeches. She opened a savings account in 1987 and she put money in it every year and she let compound interest do what compound interest does over 4 decades. She protected the asset, which was me, through structure, not sentiment. And when the moment came, I had to choose whether to open the envelope or leave it in the glove compartment forever. That was my part. She gave me the foundation. I had to decide to stand on it. I was not brave in any dramatic way. I was scared every single step of this, scared when Mr. Ballot Whitfield turned the monitor toward me, scared when Dennis called at 7 in the morning, scared sitting across from Rachel explaining a situation that felt bigger than anything I'd navigated before. But I kept moving, not because I was certain I'd win, because my grandmother had done too much for me to sit still. There's something I've come to believe firmly. The people who try to take things from others, through documents, through pressure, through the slow erosion of other people's confidence, they almost always count on not being answered. They count on the cost of responding feeling too high. They count on you being 26 and tired and not knowing what a payable on death account is. The answer to that is not rage. It's preparation, representation, and the willingness to respond on the record. It's getting a lawyer and doing it right. It's understanding that you are allowed to defend what is yours without apologizing for the act of defending it. Loretta knew that. She prepared me before I knew I needed preparing. I'm still learning how to be the kind of person she believed I already was.